What's up, hobby maniacs? Baer here again, and today we're going to take a look at the old chapter approved book from Games Workshop for Warhammer 40k. This is from 2001, and this was an important stepping stone between editions and also the development of the company. Spiky bits. Make sure you stay in the trenches by becoming a supporter over on Patreon and also scoring yourself some free miniature swag in the process. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. Check out our site, spikybits.com, for all the hot hobby tutorials, news, rumors on all your favorite hobby topics. And head on over to thelongwar.net. That's the home of the battle reports for exclusive content, early access videos, and more. Become a veteran of the Long War today. So like I was saying, the chapter approved book is a very interesting book. It bridged an interesting time for the company, so to speak, right around that sweet spot of them getting into third edition, realizing that third edition was going to be a bigger game than second edition, and that some of the rules for certain things needed a tweak. And they were very responsive. They got in there and they revised a lot of rules and came up with some ideas for some new things. Of course, there was a 3.5, there was a 4th edition, there was vehicle trial rules even, there was all sorts of stuff where they were tinkering with things, and all that seemed to kind of go away. And once 5th edition came out, and of course now again we're seeing that kind of starting to happen again right around now, which a lot of people are saying, all these FAQs and things are basically like a 7.5, and we might see an 8th edition here in the near future for Warhammer 40k. But hey, who knows? All I could say is the game is definitely clunky these days, so I wouldn't mind it getting cleaned up, tidied up a bit, so to speak. But not really tinkering with the fundamentals. But what's cool about this book here, this is chapter approved. This was I want to say this was collected by Andy Chambers as a whole, as you can tell right here. What's nice about this book is it's the second book of the Astronomicon, which chapter approved originally came out. It was originally a column in White Dwarfs, and there was a book around second edition time where it took a lot of those rules and it developed them into the second edition game. A lot of rules, FAQs, letters to the editor, all that stuff was like really big back then in the White Dwarf, because let's face it, there was no internet. So, communicating with these guys was a little bit tough at times unless you wanted to send them a letter. Who does that anymore, right? Oh, it's crazy. It's crazy 2016, the world we live in today. Man, oh man. But anyways, so what's cool about this book, like I said, it collects a lot of the older rules, a lot of the revisions to rules, and kind of shows that dedication and that character that really came through from the Games Workshop team back then. You got Andy Chambers, right here. Andy Chambers, Jervis Johnson, Gav Thorpe, Pete Haynes, and Matt Sprague with contributors. Some of these big names here that we've heard of. Tim Huckleberry's with Fantasy Flight Games now. Graham McNeil, obviously an amazing author who works for Blizzard Entertainment now. Then it goes on down the line with a lot of familiar names here as well that I'm sure a lot of you can basically pick out, and then the typical Games Workshop stuff right here. But what I really want to talk about is the actual contents. Now, from time to time, we'll probably go through and do a flashback on some of the specific sections in here, because I could literally talk about those for very long time, minutes if not hours. I would say at least minutes, maybe up to the 30-minute mark on some of these. But that being said, I'd like to do a brief overview of the book, because some people, hit me up after I did the vehicle design rules out of here, and a brief overview of what the book is and what it's all about. They were like, hey, maybe you could do the actual book itself and kind of talk about why it's important and things like that. I'd also like to get into the Tyranid Monstrosity section, because that was basically like the vehicle design rules for gargantuan creatures, what basically became known as, the kind of like on par with the super heavy walkers and things like we're seeing today. So all of this is really cool too, because it's a natural progression into a lot of bigger things that have really come down the pipe since then, and you can kind of see where they got their roots from. Like demons, for instance, were never their standalone codex. They weren't even really super a part of third edition, Chaos rather, and there was 2 books in Chaos. One really included them, one didn't, the first one. And that's what we're going to see in here is kind of like some There was models for stuff, but there really wasn't a way to use things, which was kind of disappointing for a lot of people. So as far as army lists go, apparently there's a battle in the living room. I slimmed the cats back on their food dispensation today, so there's a little tense around the cat command center because they're not exactly sure when the food's going to come out of the dish. For the current count, I believe it's about 3 hours from now, so it's going to be a rough time here in Cat Town. But getting back to the video. I'm a monster. I'm just trying to keep them thin. You know, they're getting kind of big. The one cat, I think she forgets she eats, so she just keeps eating. And she's like, oh man, what am I going to do? I'm just going to go back and eat some more food. And it's just not healthy. It's just not healthy. I can't get behind that. So in the army list section here, you'll probably notice, first off, is Sisters of Battle. You know, Sisters of Battle is always, forgive the pun, but they kind of been the redheaded stepchildren of the 40K universe. They never really got the respect they've deserved, and or the supplements. They had a really great run of miniatures around 2002, 2003. Amazing stuff, but then it just kind of all went away, and they've had these like White Dwarf supplements, download supplements. They've never really gotten the love, you know, like even the Dark Elder have gotten back in 2011. So they were a kind of like a standalone decks. They had their own decks in second edition, and then this was their very first set of rules in third edition, which is in here. Necrons too had a set of rules in here. Now Necron started out as a skirmish force, kind of late 90s, early 2000s, and we'll cover those miniatures as we kind of flip through the book here in a minute. There was basically only 3 different miniatures. There was the warrior, the destroyers, which when the destroyer died, a warrior stepped out, and the scarabs, which were way bigger than what you're used to now, and they actually clamped on the stuff and blew up, which is pretty interesting. Fielding a Death Company, you can field the whole Death Company army. They all fell to the Black Rage, and they were all susceptible. They had to be led by a chaplain, and you didn't have to roll to see if they fell, and they just kind of had options from there. It was a really rough list. A lot of people, it did well. It was very competitive. Another very competitive list was the Imperial Guard Armor Company, which was bananas good. You could take Lehman Russes as troop choices, like 3 of them, and you know what? Well, back then, there wasn't D weapons. Like, there was barely strength 10 and strength 8 stuff. You had something to strength 10, you're like, oh, that was the boogeyman back then. And now you can take a squadron of 3 Lumen Russes and they counted as troops. Like, yo, that was some serious business. Like, you were not playing the Imperial Guard Armor Company on any table I was part of because I was just going to auto lose, and you know, it was very tough to deal with. And then they came out with another version of the Armor Company later on in either late 3rd or 4th edition, I believe, and 6s always glanced the tanks, which is really interesting. Like, I'm going to shoot this Armor 14 tank and it's going to glance it on 6. How many guns do I got? Yeah, and that made it a little bit more fair, but then it's kind of, well, let's just say we didn't really see those armies anymore because the people that were fielding them were a little, maybe win at all costs, and they didn't like the fact that you could take them out on or at least cause damage on a 6, a roll of a 6, so that's kind of how that went. Q&A. We're not going to focus too much on that in our overview today because, well, to be quite honest, this stuff is pretty dated. Close Combat, putting a zap in the Tzeentch. This was the original 3rd edition Chaos book that they were trying to get kind of come to grips with and make better, which they did with the 3.5 version of the Chaos Codex, which a lot of people are still in love with to this day. Codex Armageddon, Q&A, or Seldar. Those were some of the first of the codexes to come out the pipe after the 3rd edition rulebook came out, which was included in the starter set. So that kind of explains where we're at there because this publication came out in 2001. The Crux miscellaneous rules, they were still tweaking stuff back then. They got rules for Chaos Cultists, which eventually did make it into 3.5 Chaos. Roads, craters, and other things was really interesting because you could go faster on roads. Craters did certain things. Night Fight, if you really wanted to, you know, you could have whole units disappear or get pinned. If it was Night Fight, it was kind of crazy. Smoke and blind grenades, not exactly the way they work today. They actually blocked line of sight or created cover that you had to charge through or charge into depending on who shot the grenade. So that could be advantageous or disadvantageous depending on what was going on there. Cult Terminators was another thing before 3.5 Chaos Codex where you could have, you know, marked Nurgle Terminators, marked Tzeentch Terminators. I think Tzeentch were impervious to anything that was less than strength 5. When 3.5 3.5 Codex came out, for instance, they got 2 wounds. So things changed a little bit from this book to the next Codex series. Grey Knights, if you're playing a Chaos army, you could actually field Grey Knight Terminators, but that was the only way you could do it. Remember, they didn't even have the Grey Knight or the Inquisition book hadn't even come out yet. So they weren't exactly what we know today, but there was models for them back in 1988. They put out Grey Knight models, and you could even get an Inquisitor and Terminator armor, so that's why they included them for 3rd edition. And then command groups, kind of the same deal. Crux Terminatus, people stopped taking Terminators in 3rd edition because there was no invulnerable saves. And once they introduced the AP values, which weren't in effect in 2nd edition, then it became a thing, and people were like, yo, I'm losing my Terminators just as quick as I'm losing my power armor, guys, what's up? And they're like, oh yeah, we should fix that. So then the Crux Terminatus, I'm sure it was around, but basically how it worked with the 5-up invulnerable, which still isn't super strong, but back then it was kind of born out of that. And then we get into vehicle rules. We've covered the vehicle design section out of here, but transport vehicles, they started standardizing access points, fire hatches, or fire points, access hatches, and things like that. Start right around this time here, so it's very important. Scenarios, there was only a couple of basic scenarios that came in the rulebook, so they wanted to expand upon that. And then in the back, in the appendix, which we'll cover too, just briefly, there was the Last Chancers, which was basically like the Imperial Guard Dirty Dozen, the all in the name, how GW names their stuff as far as chapters go. We've seen it for the Baneblade, Shadow Sword, Hammer, Bane, Death, Hammer, Shadow, kind of thing when it comes to naming some of those tanks, right? And then Xenos Report, basically talking about Lictors. They started, they got a rule. I forget exactly how they worked, but they basically had models, and then they all of a sudden had a rule where they were basically like kind of type like scouts. Siri, I just need to turn you off because you are the worst. Between you and the cats, you are just absolutely the worst. Absolutely. I don't know why I even have Siri. I need to get Cortana, clearly. Anywho, so there's stuff in here about Lictors and the Ultramarine special characters. They had the special standard bearer, the Ancient Hell Invictus, Captain Invictus, I think, the captain at that time of the first company, and one other guy too. I actually forget who that was. In the letters, like I said, people used to write letters. It's a real thing. And battle statistics. So here was the section, and another thing I like. Maybe GW will bring it back. Everything in here is color coded. So if you need to turn to a section, you can be like, oh, hey, let me get to the Q&A. Boom. They got the built-in little 3M tabs right there. I'm sure 3M didn't appreciate it, but I liked it just the same. So right here in this section was all of the basically how to field the Sisters of Battle. So can you imagine them putting out a book right now for Warhammer 40K that included all the supplements? I know eventually they'll mix it in with the Space Marine codexes and things. You'll have all of the supplements, that came out with the Callion rules and the Angels of Death rules and maybe the Death from the Skies all into the Space Marine codex. But for back then, for the price of this book, which I think was only $33, because basically that was the thing back then. Everything was $33 and it wasn't really in color, and this being in color was actually kind of cool. But this might have been $50, I actually forget. So here's the Sisters Battle Rules section, which of course completely invalidated today, but it was really cool to see. And if you wanted to play Sisters, well, this was a good way to pick up those rules. And then here you can see the whole Warhammer 40K section, which is really neat. All of the codexes that were out to the time of this printing, basically. So like I said, one of the first out the gate was the Codex Eldar for 3rd edition, and then they had the Craft World Eldar expansion. There was a supplement, and then there was a supplement for Imperial Guard as well. Dark Eldar Orcs, Chaos, remember this was the first Chaos. Then you had this new look to Tyranids, which held true over the 4th edition. So there's the Tyranids, Dark Angel Space Wolves, Blood Angels, Space Marines, and the Codex Armageddon, which was the last time we saw a global campaign right there. So neat little add in here. And then you get to the section with the Necrons, and remember, like I said, the Necrons were a raiding force. There was only 3 different models. They did have the thing to get back up, which was pretty neat. The Scarab, they had 4 models. That's right, the Lord. So here's the little Immortals here, and the Destroyers, the Lord, and the Warriors themselves, and the little Scarabs. And the Scarabs, like I said, they would lock on to stuff and they would blow up at initiative 10 in combat, and they had strength 3 and an AP of 2, but against vehicles they were strength 3 plus 2d6. So average of 10, these things were doing work, and each one would detonate separately because they were 6 points a model. It was a fun time. And then 2 years later in yeah, I guess it was about 2 years later. The summer of 2003 is when we got the plastic Necrons and everything changed there. Here's how to field a Death Company army back in the day. Not quite as valid anymore. And then here's the Imperial Guard Armor Company rules by Jervis Johnson. Ridiculously over the top, broken, and a lot of people loved them because they could play with all their tanks. But try beating a troop formation. I mean, nowadays it's no big deal, and you can even take the Lemur Russes in squadrons. But back then, you're talking literally 15 years ago. This was hard to deal with in 3rd edition 40k. Here it is, tanks. There were troops. There were troops. Lemur Russes were troops, and you could take 3 of them. Oh my gosh, the nightmares. I'm still having nightmares to this day. Brutal. Just simply brutal. It was mean. And then, of course, the heavy support was like the Basilisks and things. Not the Lemur Russes that spit hot fire and death in squadrons of 3. The Basilisk, which was still pretty brutal back then even. I mean, you're shooting that indirect fire template. And back then, there was guess weapons, right? So you didn't really know. You would just pick a distance. You would say, okay, well, I'm back here. I'm going to try to shoot this corner of the board. I'm going to say it's 48 inches. And then you would measure 48. And you either hit or you didn't. Savvy folks, use Pythagorean theorem to try to roughly figure out, the distance and things like that. But, it became a whole thing, and you were either really good at it or really bad at it, and obviously that gave the advantage to some folks, so they got rid of that. A little ad from Forge World just coming on the scene back then. This was one of the very first offerings here in 2001, was that Bane Blade and the sweet-ass Wave Serpent, which, of course, has been replaced by Games Workshop. Hey, you want to field a Tank Company army? Here's an ad. Oh, I love it. And then there's a bunch of Q&As and stuff in here, which really doesn't even matter anymore. Then flipping through it, we go to the next section, which is of roads, craters, and other things. So they had this really cool set of terrain from Forge World. There was craters, which are right here, and then road sec. And the roads, actually, you could come in from reserves +1 if you arrived on the road, and I think you could go an extra D6 if you... I want to say if you flat out, but that wasn't a thing back then, so I forget exactly how you did it, but you got an extra D6. Maybe it was just the movement phase if you stayed entirely on the road. So there was that. And there was force marching too. You could force march similar to fantasy. You could go double your movement if you didn't go within like 12 or 30 or 24 of an enemy, I believe it was. I forget exactly what it was. Within 12 inches, they could just double. I don't know. It was something if you couldn't be within an enemy. And then here's some rules for Chaos Cultists, which we saw in the 3.5 Codex. Demon Princes were a thing, but they didn't have any place to live, so they kind of made their own separate little entry right there. But then we saw them get kind of put into the Chaos Codex. All of this stuff was basically put into the 3.5 Chaos Codexes. Some stuff on transport vehicles, and they're bringing it all into line with fire points, access points, and then just generalized notes. The beginning in here in the back, they had the beginning of the machine spirit thing for the Land Raider. It was called fire control, and then the Land Raider could actually move in 6 inches forward if it was unable to move. So it could always move because the Land Raider itself would move itself, which is interesting. And then open top vehicles, some rules there. Here's the VDR section. We talked about that already in a previous video, so check that one out. Very cool stuff there. And then the back Tyranid monstrosities. I think there was a Dark Eldar. Oh yeah, here it is. So Dark Eldar, actually early on they realized Dark Eldar probably wasn't doing as well rules-wise as they had intended. So they came out with a series of upgrades that you could put on your vehicles, on your Dark Eldar vehicles, to try to make them a little bit more resilient. But we never really saw Dark Eldar be like super powerful. I mean, I take that back actually. The Witch Army, there was a subset in one of these White Dwarfs or chapter approves where witches would actually, if you could get witches in a combat, they did work. So there was a time when they were competitive because of the changes that Andy Chambers and Gav Thorpe worked on so tirelessly. So, it's always cool to see these guys. That's why I like this. It's nostalgic. They were going back, they were tweaking stuff, they were trying to make it work instead of just putting out rules and just being like, well, y'all figure it out. And that's great and all. I mean, I get it. A lot of communities have sprung up, Spiky Bits included, trying to help. But at the end of the day, we're like little fiefdoms, in the land of Games Workshop. We can only do so much without the support of the motherland, so to speak. So it's cool to see Games Workshop being so proactive back in the day, and I'd really like to see that, and I think we're starting to see that now with the new FAQ. So here's the monstrosities, like I said. It's basically build your own a gargantuan creature, kind of like today, and then here's some interesting rule sections here on advanced missions, where if you wanted to play some other stuff, not necessarily like your normal cleanse, patrol, or recon, which were pretty much all that was in the 3rd edition rulebook, well, you could, and here they were. And then in the back, you got new units, with, Colonel Schaefer's Last Chancers, which were the Dirty Dozen. And then right here, if you've ever seen this graphic before, this graphic actually has rules. They give War Gear and a little special rule right there, and you can field these guys as their own army at 1,000 points, or you could take them a la carte, I believe. I don't exactly remember, but there was that. So there is all that. And then the back here, how to name your chapter. Xenos report on the Lictor. Oh, I guess that wasn't any rules. I remember at some point they put out rules for him a la carte, and it was as soon as the model had come out, kind of ahead of the whole Tyranid release, which really got a redo in 4th edition. I thought that's what that was, but it was not. And then here's Ancient Hell Evictus. He was actually a model you could get in the what was it? The little the sticker thing where you basically got stickers every time you ordered something, and then you could go and trade them in to get like models. There was a Beyblade you could get, Skulls program, that's what it was. Or you could get, an Adeptus Mechanicus kind of little Magos team, and man, there was all sorts of cool little stuff you could get, and they kind of got away from that. So this was actually one of the Ultramarine Standard Bearer you could get from that, and there's some special rules for him. Chaplain Cassius came out about this time, and he didn't have any rules, so there he is right there, the very first rendition of Chaplain Cassius, which of course now we know he's risen to fame in Death Watch and all of that, being an integral part of fighting the Tyranids. And then Captain Invictus of the Ultramarines First Company. This guy was actually a conversion that appeared around this time, based on this particular little, I guess, the preliminary data sheet. They didn't really have data sheets back then, but that's what you would call that these days. He had basically a twin-link plasma gun and this ball-and-ass power fist, and you could convert him from the Terminator Captain model that was out back then. And he was captain of the First Company. It was a whole big thing. You could actually take him in an Ultramarine army or, a Space Marine. So that was pretty neat. A lot of people converted that guy up. And he was pretty cool. You saw a lot of those on the tabletop there. And then some letters. Like I said, people wrote letters back then. Who knew? So that's a brief overview. Now, like I said, I've already talked for about 20 minutes on this thing. I can go into this thing for at least 2 minutes, possibly 3. But I've got Siri and I got cats to deal with, so we're going to go deal with them. We're going to circle back and give you another flashback for next week. But I hope you enjoyed this one. Make sure you come on back next week for our weekly Friday. Or I guess I put the article out on Spiky Bits on Friday, but this is the Tuesday flashback, I believe.
Deleted scenes, bonus content, and all the interviews and post-game wrap-up videos can be located in the Hall of Veterans on thelongwar.net. Visit thelongwar.net today and try a week completely free with no strings attached. That's not all. Thelongwar.net is also your hobby resource for exclusive early access with an ad-free experience to all your favorite videos. Members of the Hall of Veterans gain early exclusive access to multiple hobby videos.